One of the greatest traps that a Christian can fall into is to believe that they've sinned, when in reality they've only been tempted to sin. And I'm going to tell you why this is such a clever, cunning and effective tactic of the enemy. It's so easy for Christians to confuse themselves in this way. We can get an emotion, we can get a thought which is in opposition to God, and we can convince ourselves that, we've done something wrong, that God is displeased with us, that we've sinned. But the reason that this is so effective, this tactic of the enemy, is because we're going to be tempted. The Bible tells us we're going to be tempted as part of living in this world. We can't help the thoughts that come up or the emotions that come up, and we should never confuse those for actually being sinful or being displeasing to God. It's all about how you respond to those thoughts and emotions that matter. If we have a look at the scriptures, we think of Jesus, the sinless one, and his life here on the earth. And it says here in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, it says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." So what this proves is that we can be tempted, but not be walking in sin. Perfect example of this will be, maybe you're just sitting there, maybe you're on your phone, and all of a sudden an unclean thought comes in. A thought to go and look up something on your phone. That in itself isn't a sin, it's a temptation. But someone can get that thought and feel like, oh, I've got this unclean thought. This thought is displeasing to God, I'm being displeasing to God. And what it actually does is it actually causes you to feel condemned without having done anything wrong. It puts a gap between you and God, it pushes you further away from God, and it actually makes you more likely to then go into sin because you're already feeling guilty, you're already feeling disconnected from God. Another example might be, you might have a thought or feeling towards a person. Maybe anger rises up inside of you and you think to yourself, this is terrible, I shouldn't be feeling this towards this person, my heart is not right. But you've actually done nothing wrong. The Bible even tells us, it says, be angry, but do not sin. In other words, we can have the thought of anger come up, but it's not that matters. You can't help that. It's what you actually do with that matters. So what we need to think of, I'll give you a good illustration here, right? This is an example. We'll take this matchbox. Say that this represents a thought or a feeling, right? And when you're tempted to sin, that comes up there. You can't control that, but you can control what you do with it. So let's say that starting a fire we'll make the analogy that that's a sin, right? So you've got this matchbox in your hand. Now, the sin doesn't start when the matchbox is in your hand. The sin starts when all of a sudden you pick it up and you think to yourself, oh, okay, what am I going to do with this? Continues when you open it up, when you get out a match, and you start a fire. Each one of those steps is a sin because you are engaging with that thing and actually progressing it. But if you've got this matchbox just sitting in your hand like this, and you look at it and you go, oh, it's a matchbox, you can start a fire with a matchbox, but you take it and you just put it down and you take it out of your hand, then you haven't sinned. And that's the way that temptation works, and that's the way that sin works. So we want to be really clear about that. Now, when we have a temptation that comes upon us, what we want to actually think to ourselves is to turn our mindset around and think, this is actually an opportunity. This is an opportunity to exercise faith. This is an opportunity to be pleasing to God. And if that's the first thought that comes into your mind, then you can actually come at that from the right perspective and recognize that it's actually an opportunity to exercise your faith, to grow closer to God. And you're not filled with this guilt over something that you can't control. Now, at the same time, we should always be making sure that we are not putting ourselves in positions where we can be tempted beyond what is already taking place in our lives. The Bible says in Matthew 26:41 in the garden at Gethsemane, Jesus says to his disciples, watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation, for the spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. And that's what we need to recognize. We don't want to put ourselves into situations where we're going to be tempted, where we know we're going to be tempted, where we want to put measures up in place in situations where we know that it's possible that temptation might come, because the spirit is willing and wants to obey God, but the flesh is weak, and we should never mess with temptations, but rather we should recognize it. And the first step that we take is the most important one. That's the one that determines whether we sin or not. And we need to make that step immediately to not sin and to turn away from that temptation. And we need to have this as our mindset every time temptation comes up. So I just wanted to speak this out, because so many Christians can get condemned by just thinking a wrong thought or feeling when you can't even control it. But I just want to tell you that every time that comes up, it's an opportunity to exercise faith to glorify God. Don't beat yourself up. Turn to God and say, God, help me in this temptation. I want to do what honors you and what is pleasing to you. And then you will avoid that snare and that mindset, which will actually lead you into sin. I hope you've enjoyed this video, friends. Look forward to talking to you soon. God bless you.